Well, here's what the transporters in Star Trek should really sound like.
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hey, I'm Phil Thomas, and you might as well consider me a video game newbie.
And I'm Andy Hunter, a longtime gamer, sequestered only in my little Nintendo corner.
Today, we're going to continue our conversation from last month on hatred by taking a closer look at the company behind it, Destructive Creations. Now, longtime listeners will know that I generally play the game we're talking about in advance, and I share my thoughts on the experience. However, you may have noticed that I didn't offer any insights into my time playing Hatred. Fortunately, our esteemed colleague, Alfred Stevens, shared his thoughts on the game. And you might be wondering why I didn't talk about playing Hatred, and the reason is I made a deliberate choice not to play Hatred. The short answer as to why is that I didn't want to give the people who made it any of my money, and the long answer is effectively the subject of today's episode. So let's bring everybody back up to speed by quickly recapping what we covered last time. Hatred was an isometric shooter released for the PC in 2015 by Destructive Creations. The game cast the player in the role of an unnamed character whom we affectionately dubbed Alan, aka the antagonist, or not important, who enacts a killing spree across 7 levels, murdering anyone who gets in his way on his path toward a violent death. A teaser trailer showing Alan in the midst of his rampage dropped on October the 16th, 2014, and sparked some heated discussion in the game community. As we covered last time, Destructive Creations successfully tied their debut game to Gamergate, which was an online movement launched in 2014 by an angry subset of gamers who called for ethics in games journalism, while alleging various ethical issues and conflicts of interest among members of the mainstream gaming press. However, the rhetoric largely boiled down to peddling various conspiracy theories, railing against any form of video game criticism, and denouncing any efforts to make video games more inclusive to people who weren't straight cisgender white dudes. Gamergaters blamed the problems they saw in video games on social justice warriors, or SJWs, which was effectively a catch-all for anyone they didn't like, including video game scholars and critics, journalists at mainstream gaming news sites like Kotaku, Polygon, or IGN, allegedly unethical game developers, and pretty much anyone who was critical of them. Their methods often boiled down to harassment campaigns, ranging from sharing people's personal information online to sending rape or death threats, and many of the targets of their ire just happened to be marginalized people in the game community, especially women. All of this and more will be the topic of a future episode that I'm steeling myself to research.
You gotta practice self-care, Kevin.
The team at Destructive Creations were certainly Gamergate supporters. However, they also weren't above exploiting the outrage of the Gamergate crowd for some free marketing, promising Hatred was a statement against the alleged menaces of political correctness, censorship, and highfalutin art house games. In turn, Gamergate supporters embraced the title as a symbol of free speech and a big old middle finger to the SJWs. However, it's worth noting that despite the game's defenders' cries of censorship, as far as I can tell, there were no major calls among Hatred's critics for it to be censored, banned, or otherwise suppressed. Most of the criticism of Hatred focused less on whether it had a right to exist, but what a game where you enacted a mass shooting meant for the future of video games as both a business and artistic medium. Some thought the game would attract negative attention from moral crusaders of the Jack Thompson and Dave Grossman variety, who claim violent video games are responsible for real-world acts of violence and needed to be regulated like you would tobacco or alcohol. Others, meanwhile, accused Destructive Creations of deliberately stoking a controversy to give their small indie PC game a bunch of free publicity. Hatred's pre-release was quite the emotional roller coaster for the small indie title. In the roughly 8 months between the game's initial announcement and release, it was removed from Steam Greenlight with no explanation, only to be reinstated several hours later, also with no explanation, issued an AO or adults-only rating by the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, and covered in dozens of write-ups on gaming news sites. Incidentally, the same gaming news sites Hatred supporters claim were trying to suppress it. All of this culminated with its June 1st, 2015 release, where it garnered a middling to negative critical reception on account of it being a dull, repetitive shooter wherein the violence basically meant nothing. Now, mind you, many supporters didn't care, giving it overwhelmingly positive reviews and reasoning that even if Hatred wasn't a good game, it needed gamer support as a check on the alleged tyranny of the SJWs. However, the experience of playing it left some Hatred supporters thinking they'd somehow been tricked into buying what they thought was an edgy, transgressive mass shooting simulator, only to find that it was a boring, buggy, aggressively self-serious mass shooting simulator. This then led some former fans to blame the SJWs for giving Hatred too much of a public platform, notwithstanding the fact that Gamergate supporters were much more likely to buy and play Hatred than its critics. In any case, the temptation must have been great for Destructive Creations CEO Yaroslav Zielinski and his team to follow up their incendiary first title with Hatred sequels. You may recall, Hatred was effectively a gritty remake of Postal, a similarly controversial mass shooting themed game released for the PC in 1997 by Running with Scissors. However, unlike Running with Scissors, which has spent the last quarter century either re-releasing Postal or putting out Postal sequels of hilariously diminishing quality, Destructive Creations made it clear they had no plans to turn Hatred into a franchise. As Zielinski explained in an interview sometime after Hatred's release, quote, under almost every one of our posts on social media, there are people writing Hatred 2 when? It's great to know that you've made something that people want more of. But my clear statement is that I don't intend to make the sequel. And the reason is simple. With the first game, I already did what I felt and spoke what I thought. Hatred 2 would be done only for commercial purposes, and I'm not a damn sellout. Of course, I have ideas for the sequel, but I consider them kind of soulless. In some ways, Hatred is my life's work, and I prefer to be the only one. This chapter is closed. End quote. Zielinski, a man of artistic integrity.
Oh, but what a missed opportunity. It could be called Hatred 2, Copycat Killer. Because, if you assume that Alan dies as he intends, then Hatred 2 would be about someone else inspired by Alan. Which would ironically then have made Alan not unimportant, as he believed himself to be.
Well, Andy, I thought it should have been called Hatred 2, The Hatred Strikes Back.
Although if it's really following the Star Wars mode, it would be Hatred 2, Love Strikes Back.
Oh, Love Strikes Back. We struck at love, but then what happens when love says no more?
A cynical person might say it's harder to trick certain segments of the gaming population more than once, which would put a lot of pressure for a Hatred sequel to top its predecessor. In any case, Destructive Creations went in other directions for Hatred's follow-ups. As of this recording, in the years since Hatred's release, the company has put out 3 games. Each of them on paper represent distinctly different settings and genres. However, as we're going to see, there's some common threads that run through their entire body of work. And to understand those threads, we need to step back, because while there were concerns about Hatred's content, as we covered last time, there was another controversy that emerged around the game's pre-release that had less to do with the game and more about the folks who created it. So today, we're going to take a closer look at Destructive Creations, specifically what some of the team have been up to in addition to crafting the adventures of our buddy Alan. We will then use that to take a closer look at their games library since Hatred, and the ways the development team that boasted it had made it an avowedly anti-political game in Hatred has spent the last 7 years making some political-ass games.
So would you say that you're about to offer some destructive criticism?
Oh, God. Now, before we get started, I need to get serious for a second, because I need to warn our listeners in advance that we're going to be tackling some potentially heavy topics in this episode. This is another very special episode of Scandalous Games. So content warning. We're going to talk a bit about racism, especially Islamophobia, as well as anti-Semitism, homophobia, and transphobia. We're also going to take a closer look at some groups that can be characterized as, if not outright Nazis, then at least Nazi adjacent. Now, we're going to try to approach these topics with our trademark style of laughing at the state of the world, if for no other reason to keep from going crazy. But if this isn't your jam, we got a bunch of other episodes in the library, including that time Acclaim may have tried to convince people to name their newborn baby Turok, a bevy of hilarious crypto scams, and the wacky escapades of gaming's greatest Karen, Mr. Jack Thompson.
Oh, yeah, those Jack Thompson episodes are gold.
Now, experience has taught me that when addressing heavy topics, self-care is really important. With that in mind, Andy and Phil, for the sake of our mental health during this episode, I'm bringing back an old favorite from our previous very special episode on the relationship between Mortal Kombat and mass incarceration. If the discussion gets too frustrating or too sad, or we just start generally losing faith in humanity, at any point, without any judgment, anyone can yell, "Get over here!" and we will briefly pause the discussion for a little mini game I've developed.
Oh, nice.
Now, this time around, I'm going to share with you a gaming quotation delivered in the style of our boy Alan, and you need to decide if this is a line he uttered in Hatred or if I pulled it from another video game. So how's that sound?
I'm really excited to hear the wahoo, when you're just quoting Mario or something.
I did think at one point of having one of them be, "Thank you so much for playing my game."
Wait, what is that from?
That's the ending line if you beat Mario 64.
Oh.
Thank you so much for playing my game.
This is how much of a video game newbie Phil is, everybody. That even the 64-bit era is before he joined.
All right, do we want to start with one? Test it out?
Get over here.
All right.
Death, the lowest common denominator of all.
I'm going to say, yeah, that's Alan.
I'm going to say no.
What I find fun with is the two of you, we could split decisions like this. This one is from hatred.
Yeah, suck it, Phil.
Ah,
Oh, wait, sorry. That's the opposite of self-care. Please suck it, my good friend Phil.
we can agree to disagree.
So let's start with a refresher on Destructive Creations. Destructive Creations is a Gliwice, Poland-based game studio founded in 2014 by Jaroslav Zielinski. Zielinski had worked for about 5 years as an animator and motion capture artist for the Farm 51, another Gliwice-based game company where he worked on such titles as Necrovision, Painkiller, Hell and Damnation, and Two Worlds 2. And prior to that, he had been a modder for games such as Duke Nukem 3D and Wolfenstein 3D. For Yaroslav, Hatred was a passion project based on his love of the original Postal, and he managed to convince a bunch of his former Farm 51 coworkers to join his new company, and the team consisted of about 10 to 13 guys at any given point. Hatred's teaser trailer propelled the small, unknown Polish studio into the mainstream gaming headlines, which got some people looking at what kinds of people would make a game like that. And it didn't take long for people to discover some troubling facts about Hatred's creators. Some folks dug into the social media presence of several Destructive Creations employees and posted their findings on the gaming blog Fuck No Video Games, a Tumblr site created in 2012 to call attention to racism, sexism, and homophobia in both the games industry and the community at large. By 2014, the site was avowedly against Gamergate, and the site's creator frequently demonstrated how the alleged push for ethics in games journalism frequently devolved into harassment and threats of violence, and offered a platform for other people to anonymously share their encounters with Gamergate or spotlight Gamergate supporters in the community. On October the 17th, 2014, the day after the Hatred teaser trailer dropped, Fuck No Video Games published a post with a, to say the least, provocative headline about Destructive Creations, declaring, quote, "Hatred is a genocide simulator developed by neo-Nazis," end quote. The author argued that bitter hatred was not just a motivation for Alan's murderous crusade, it was also clearly a driving philosophy for a bunch of the boys at Destructive Creations. Tracking their online presence, the author provided evidence that several Destructive Creations employees were fans of Polish ultra-nationalist, far-right, and neo-Nazi groups. For example, a quick look at Jaroslav Zielinski's Facebook page showed he liked the page of a group called the Polska Liga Obrony. And in advance, apologies to our Polish listeners. I'm going to probably do some bad Polish pronunciations, not intentionally, but it's going to happen. There are a lot of consonants in Polish. And so who are the Polska Liga Obrony, you ask? Well, the Polska Liga Obrony, also known as the Polish Defense League, is a Polish-based ultra-nationalist group, and probably their biggest claim to fame is they really, really don't like Muslims. How much do they not like Muslims, you ask? For one thing, they like patrolling Polish nightclubs and walking between dancing couples to separate them. They think one of the dancers might be Muslim. They also like to occasionally mail pork products to Islamic cultural centers in something the league calls bacon action, which outside of this context is a term that has no right to be connected to these assholes, because I would love me some bacon action, although in more of the giving me bacon rather than harassing people kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in general, it's detestable to, harass people in general, but then also more specifically, how dare they take something as beautiful as bacon and use it to cause harm? I mean, to anybody other than the pigs.
Yeah. The only true harm that should be involved in bacon is what it does to my arteries.
It's funny. So I'm not Muslim, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there who get a look at me and assume I'm Muslim. And if somebody left bacon on my front door as a hate crime, that would be kind of hilarious because I would probably just make breakfast with it.
It's like grease off a duck's back with Phil.
It's like grease off a pig's back.
I'm glad we're laughing. I really am. On top of that, in 2015, they called for a national online database of all Muslims living in Poland, complete with photos, places of employment, and home addresses, which I'm sure isn't for anything nefarious. Maybe the league only wants to give them all presents.
Ooh, yikes. Get over here.
Yeah, seconded.
I mean, we don't want to use them all up too early in the episode, but I'm sure I'm not alone in noting the similarity between that and, the documentation of Jewish families that took place under the Nazi regime.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to die.
I think that's not Alan.
Really? I think that is Alan.
I love that this is splitting, you guys. That is not from Ellen.
What?
That is from the early 1990s Konami beat-em-up arcade game, X-Men.
Oh.
Had legendarily bad writing, including one that became a meme of Magneto yelling to the X-Men, X-Men, welcome to die.
It always kind of seems like up until about 10 years ago or so that like localization got any good. So I feel like something like that had to be like a bad translation, and just the people doing the translation were like, well, we've got this Japanese person standing over my shoulder who doesn't speak English, who won't accept my feedback that welcome to die is a sentence that makes no sense.
Speaking of the X-Men, now there's a concept that did a good job of exploring concepts around genocide and prejudice as an allegory with, mutants being minorities as a proxy for racial, ethnic, religious minorities. So I like the juxtaposition of you bringing that in here, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
All right, so yeah, these guys, they want a registry of all Muslims in the country, surely for nothing awful and nefarious, and I'm just reading too much into it. But that's not all. While Yaroslav was out expressing his support for Islamophobes, his employees, and again, I'm going to apologize for Polish names, Jakub Stikno and Marcin Kazimierczak, Hatred's designer and FX artist respectively, each gave Facebook Lives to several Poland-based hate groups, such as the Polish National Camp, or ONR, and the All Polish Youth. Now, who are these groups, you ask? Well, buckle up, because if you thought things were bad before, it's going to get awful fashy in here. Let's start with the National Radical Camp, who are basically Polish Nazis. They're an openly fascist group that was first established in 1934, who collaborated with Nazi Germany during their occupation of Poland in World War II. They were disbanded after the war, only to be reformed in 1993 by a couple of skinheads, and they were active on Facebook until they were eventually banned for promoting hatred against minority groups. I don't know if they're back or not. I haven't followed up because I've been doing enough research in this that I'm probably on some list somewhere.
Well, if they're not allowed back on Facebook yet, I'm sure they've been allowed back on Twitter at least.
Elon welcomes with open arms. Oh yeah, they're also pretty keen on Nazi imagery, including using Nazi salutes during anti-Jewish rallies. And in February 2021, the Polish Supreme Court ruled that they could be called a fascist organization, which is a pretty impressive revelation given the influence of right-wing political groups in Poland, and more on that in a little bit. Meanwhile, the All Polish Youth was first established in 1922 and reformed in 1989 as an avowedly white supremacist, anti-Semitic, and anti-LGBTQIA group. Both groups also have ties to a far-right political party in Poland called the National Movement, a group that has described homosexuality as, quote, a disease, end quote. And it wasn't all just Facebook likes, too. Kazimierczak shared on his Facebook page that he planned to attend an Independence Day rally on November the 11th, 2014, that was organized by the All Polish Youth. In fact, it's worth mentioning that far-right groups in Poland often meet on November the 11th to start trouble. For example, skipping ahead in 2020, members of the ONR violated COVID restrictions to host an Independence Day rally in Warsaw, where they clashed with police and launched flares into an apartment that dared to hang a pride flag.
Wow.
These guys suck. They're awful. But that's not all. Level designer and lighting artist Cyprian Listowski also put a post on his personal Facebook of work from his side gig as a tattoo artist, and many of his tattoos depicted runes and symbols popular among both neo-Nazis and OG Nazis, including the Sonnenrad, also known as the Sun Wheel or Black Sun, and the Sonechko, which is a variation of the swastika. So far, all cool and good and not scary at all. Get over here.
Get over here?
It's going to be one of those episodes. All right.
You must accept your death. Be freed from the night.
Ooh.
I'm going to say yes.
I'm also going to say yes. Although the second half makes me doubt myself a little, but I'm going to say, yeah, that's from Hatred.
That is a line from one of my favorite characters in the FromSoft series, Gehrman the First Hunter from Bloodborne.
Oh, wait, he says that?
Yes, when he kills you. So I've heard it 1,000 times.
Oh, I guess I didn't know that because I've never been killed by Gehrman.
Boom.
Oh, snap.
That's an impressive flex. That really is. in addition to calling out hatred's ties to actual hatred. The poster at Fuck No Video Games also took mainstream gaming news sites to task for downplaying Destructive Creations' fascist ties in favor of the violent video game angle, concluding, quote, journalists and commentators alike do the industry a disservice by obfuscating the developers' racially charged political hate in deference to the otherwise well-tried issue of violence in games. In doing so, they're playing into the exact type of controversy its developers have sought to capitalize on, end quote.
Shout out to that website. That's an awesome website to exist. Even more so learning that they were around pre-Gamergate and right away were discounting it. When so many in the, like, it seems like mainstream gaming press for a while did humor or do the like both sidesism of like, well, you know, yes, it's bad to harass, but on the other hand, do they have any valid concerns about ethics in gaming? So.
Yeah, I agree. That's important information.
Yeah, I agree. Unsurprisingly, the fact that the people making an honest-to-goodness murder simulator also probably thought Hitler was a pretty cool dude attracted some buzz in the gaming community. As of this recording, the Fuck No Video Games article has nearly 3,500 engagements, including likes, comments, and repostings. Also unsurprisingly, given what we've covered in our previous episode, a bunch of gaming journalists reached out to Destructive Creations for comment.
For unrelated reasons, I'm reminded of how what initially in 2015 and 2016 seemed like a long shot candidacy of Donald Trump was just like, well, but we have to keep covering him because he's so wacky.
And then yada, yada, yada. There's 4 years of our lives we'll never get back.
Company representatives dismissed the accusations outright. When asked by James Fudge of Game Politics, Zielinski responded, quote, these accusations are simply really stupid, end quote. However, he strangely punctuated this with a smiley face emoticon. So you take from that what you will. He's a troll after all.
I feel like I don't like the guy.
Years later, he described the allegations to Andy Chalk of PC Gamer as, quote, plain bullshit, end quote.
What, that he's a fascist?
Yeah, that he's a fan of fascist groups. Destructive Creations published an official statement addressing the allegations with an October the 21st, 2014 post on the official hatred website titled, The First Storm Resisted. Zielinski, ever the class act, first thanked the gaming press and all of the haters for all the free publicity they had given hatred since the trailer launched less than a week ago, writing, quote, we wish to thank all of our haters and all upset press for a great marketing campaign they've done for us. A week ago, we were a little company from the middle of nowhere, just some guys making some game. Today, everyone heard about hatred and us. All thanks goes to those who were trying to harm us with no desired effect. What a pity, end quote. With that out of the way, he categorically denied the accusations that he and his team supported neo-Nazis as baseless rumors pushed by some attention-seeking bloggers. Interestingly, the irony of a company marketing itself on attention-seeking, accusing critics of making allegations just to gain publicity, was not lost on Zielinski, as he added, quote, many can call us attention whores. Well, we try to get world's attention to our product, and as you can see, it worked perfectly. But there are some true attention whores out there who are trying to imply that we are neo-Nazis and some other stupid stuff. Do not believe everything you read on the web, especially written by no-name pathetic bloggers or some unhappy guys commenting around the web. For all the shitstorm upon us, that was the only thing which really made us pissed off because it's simply too much, end quote. The rest of the statement involved posts by Zielinski, Kazmarchuk, and Stikno saying things to the effect that they could not be Nazis because Nazi Germany invaded and occupied Poland. We'll address that in a little bit more detail in a minute. On top of that, Yaroslav declared that who cares what people like on Facebook anyway? You know how it is. You've all been young and stupid. Sometimes you say you like Dane Cook or the Spin Doctors or a fascist Islamophobic paramilitary group, and suddenly people get their hackles up and start accusing you of supporting this or that far-right ideology. As Zielinski explained in his statement, quote, my forefathers suffered greatly because of totalitarian regimes. So who the fuck would I be if I truly support any of Nazi activists? People give likes on Facebook all the time, even if they don't know what is exactly behind this or that fan page. I did the same. Suddenly it makes me a neo-Nazi. Great, have fun, you stupid ass haters. Learn some history first, because when I read about Polish death camps, it makes me disgusted. You don't know shit about our history, and you fall easily to false propaganda, end quote.
At any point, does he ever explicitly come out against Nazi ideologies or fascism?
Hold on to that for a sec.
Okay.
When pressed, however, Zelensky felt the need to clarify these remarks. For example, he explained to a Polygon reporter that when he said he liked Without Thinking, a Facebook page for a violent ultra-nationalist group intent on registering every Muslim in the country, what he really meant to say is that he liked it because he felt they were a valuable news source. Posting, quote, "As for me supposedly supporting Polska Liga Obrony on Facebook, I've liked this page because it's a source of information on what is going on right now in the Middle East in Europe, and a lot of evil shit going on. Those are real problems, not our game. Some things media would not show nor tell. So no, I'm not any kind of supporter. I don't watch TV. I don't have time to follow all of the news. If there's some evil shit going on in Europe or Middle East, I get the message on my wall. That's simply the only reason I've liked the page," end quote. So there you go. It's all just a silly misunderstanding. The head of Destructive Creations doesn't actually like a group that thinks Poland should have a database with the addresses and occupations of every Muslim person in the country because he's a member of that group. He just thinks they're a useful and reliable news source.
So, yeah, I've got two things to say. The first is obviously that, kind of gives the lie anyway to what he's saying. If he still basically agrees with the quote unquote news that this group is posting on Facebook. And then also, two, I feel like it would have been easy for him to say, yeah, I was young, and now that this has been brought to my attention, I regret that and just apologize. Then the story would go away. But because I think scholarship has shown that one of the main tenets of fascism is you need a strongman leader, it's not surprising to me that somebody who maybe supports some fascistic ideology can't bring themselves to ever say, oh, yeah, my bad, sorry, but instead has to just get all aggro and defensive about it. And the third, I realized I had one more other thing to say, which was, get over here.
Let me just yes and Andy. In situations like this, however your name got dragged into it, you kind of have to lead with, I reject X, Y, or Z in all its forms. Like if your name's getting dragged into something you don't believe in, you have to come out and say that up front. And if you don't, then people will wonder.
I'm reminded of another quotation he said in Redford's The Hatred, where he said, submission is for the weak. We will not follow the ideas we can't accept, which gives a lot more of a sinister tone when you hear about these kinds of beliefs. But I heard call for a quotation, so I got one in mind for this.
The soil is hungry. It is also thirsty.
I'm going to guess that that's not from Hatred.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you there. It sounds more like a Mortal Kombat style thing where I'm going to water this lawn in your blood.
I was actually thinking that if it weren't read in a scary voice, it might just be from a farming sim game or something.
Oh, yeah. What's that farming simulator thing?
Oh, like Stardew Valley?
No, the other one.
Harvest Moon?
No, the one with the guy. It's not Farmville. It's what's the thing everybody plays on their phones? And the guy who yells at you?
Animal Crossing?
Animal Crossing. Yeah, maybe is that a line from Animal Crossing?
This is a line from Hatred.
No way!
Yeah. He says the soil is hungry, it is also thirsty.
I swear that that's something that happens in Animal Crossing. I've never played Animal Crossing, but you would imagine, right?
Now you mentioned, I could hear some cute anime characters encouraging you to both plant your plants and water them. The soil's hungry, it's also thirsty.
Exactly.
Now, to be fair, based on what I've read, when Yaroslav says he's not a neo-Nazi despite liking neo-Nazi groups on Facebook, he's technically correct. However, it's not because he's secretly anti-fascist. Rather, it's more about the state of right-wing politics in Poland. So buckle up for some context. Now, I will say in advance, before we go any further, I am not a Polish historian. I'm in no way an expert on Polish politics, and there will be definitely places where I fall short on this topic. So I'll include all the notes and sources that I've read in the show notes on our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com. And if people see issues where I've fallen short, scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. With that out of the way, here we go with some Polish history. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a predictable rise in avowedly anti-communist political groups in Poland, which is kind of a pretty natural response to decades of one-party rule. This helped give rise to various right-wing political groups in the country. And conservative parties came and went through the 1990s and the early 2000s. And in 2001, two right-wing parties emerged that ended up having the most staying power. Those are the Civic Platform, or the PO, and the Law and Justice, or the PIS. In 2015, 2015, the PIS swept the Polish elections, taking the presidency and majorities in parliament, and right-wing groups have largely dominated Polish politics ever since. Other parties that made gains in 2015, although not as significant as the PIS, include the Agreement Party and the aforementioned National Movement Party, those folks that said being gay was a disease. So what do I mean when I say Polish right-wing politics? A lot of Polish right-wing political ideology is similar to conservative groups in other countries, such as America's Republican Party. These include a strong sense of Polish nationalism, a deep mistrust of outside influences. For example, Polish conservatives generally don't like the European Union, and some push for a Polish equivalent of Brexit, an opposition to immigration, either among specific groups entering Poland or in opposition to immigration as a whole, and a belief that Poland is a fundamentally Christian nation, specifically aligning with Catholic moral values. So, for example, Polish conservative politicians are generally against LGBTQ rights. However, there's another key pillar of right-wing Polish politics you need to understand: Islamophobia. Despite the fact that Muslims are a very, very, very small minority in the country, as low as 0.1% of the population, the looming fear that Muslims are cooking up something nasty in Poland is a staple of the country's right-wing political rhetoric. In fact, there's a constant push and pull among different right-wing political parties in Poland over who is the most appealing Islamophobic party for voters. Right now, it's the PIS, but they have plenty of competition over who hates Muslims more. Now, how far they take this rhetoric depends on the party. Some frame anti-Muslim sentiment within a mistrust of immigrants in general. Your standard immigrants are taking our jobs or just leeching off social welfare programs, the stuff you see in conservatives in other countries. Others claim that Islam is so diametrically opposed to the dominant white Catholic Polish monoculture that Muslims in Poland can never truly be part of the country, so why bother letting them in the first place? Others play to stereotypes, claiming stuff like that all Muslims are terrorists, and still others get in some real white supremacist and ethno-nationalist shit, saying stuff like immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa invading Poland so they could breed prodigiously and inevitably replace the country's overwhelmingly white Catholic population. And this idea is actually really common in white supremacist groups in general. It's called the replacement theory. They just insert ethnic minority that they don't like will not replace us, is basically the rhetoric of these things.
It's like maybe something you might chant if you were marching while holding tiki torches, perhaps.
Yeah, but Home Depot was out of nooses, so what did you expect them to do? So what's the state of immigration into Poland? Like, is there a large mass of people who are trying to relocate to Poland that I don't know about that you need to issue something like that?
I mean, there has been a movement of migrants and refugees coming from places like the Middle East and North Africa and making their way into Europe, which is, I didn't go into too much detail on it. It's been a big humanitarian issue, and it has been a convenient fuel for anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim sentiment in a lot of countries in Europe and the United States. How much of a big issue it is, I didn't do a lot of research into this. Like I said, the thing that astonished me the most is the percentage of the population in Poland that is actually Muslim is so witheringly small. It's such an insignificant number that it doesn't matter. It's just a bogeyman they've set up to rile up and scare their voters. And as part of the PIS's platform in 2015, when they took over Polish government, was stoking anti-Muslim sentiment, especially fear of refugee groups coming from the Middle East and North Africa. The party also staged protests against the construction of a mosque in Warsaw.
I will preemptively forgive you if at any point you misspeak and call them the POS.
Take that, Polish right-wing politics. And all that is just the country's mainstream politics. That isn't even including the various anti-Muslim groups operating both in the country and online. As a 2018 report on Islamophobia in Poland observed, quote, online anti-Muslim activism is quite extensive in Poland, and there are many websites dedicated to spreading stereotypes about Islam and Muslims. There are online groups like Nie dla Islamizacji Europy, no to the Islamization of Europe, with 348,000 Facebook followers in January 2017, and Stop Islamizacji Europy, which is Stop the Islamization of Europe, with 64,000 followers, end quote. As a result, there are a variety of avowedly anti-Muslim paramilitary and pseudo-fascist groups operating in Poland, such as Yaroslav's Buddies and the Polish Defense League. These groups also frequently have close ties to other similar groups operating throughout Europe as part of what's called the counter-jihad movement, including the English Defense League and Germany's Pegida, aka Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West, whose idea has been promoted online by the Polish Defense League. They're all kind of interacting with each other. Therefore, you could argue that in liking violent anti-Muslim groups, Yaroslav and his buddies hold beliefs that are pretty much in line with a lot of mainstream conservative Polish politics, and in that respect are not Nazis. However, it's worth mentioning that there are people who disagree with Yaroslav's assessment that he and his team couldn't be neo-Nazis on account of being Polish, namely groups that monitor neo-Nazis in Poland. For example, Rafał Pankowski of Never Again, a non-profit organization that monitors racism and discrimination in Poland and calls attention to ultra-nationalist and fascist organizations in the country, explained to Charlie Hall of Polygon the denials of Zielinski and his team on the basis that they couldn't be Nazis on account of being Polish, sidestepped the fact that groups like the Polish Defense League and ONR espouse similar beliefs as the Nazis. As Pankowski explained, quote, "The defense that Destructive Creations employees make is that we are Polish and that Nazism is a German thing. Therefore, we cannot be Nazis. This doesn't make too much sense to me, but it is true in a way. Nazism was invented in Germany back in the day, but if you look at ONR's ideology, in some ways it's not so very different from Nazism, but it's Polish. Certainly, they don't believe in the superiority of the German race, but they are very much hostile to different minorities living in Poland, and they don't believe in a democratic system. So in some ways, this ideology is similar to Nazism, or fascism, or extreme nationalism. There are different ways you could call it, but I think there's something in common. But they wouldn't want to call themselves neo-Nazis, but I think in some ways they're not so different from the other versions of what you could call fascist or neo-fascist or extreme right-wing ideology in other countries," end quote. So in short, Destructive Creations' Facebook likes and their responses to criticism suggest that while they're not necessarily card-carrying members of the National Socialist Party, they definitely seem to ascribe to a bunch of their beliefs, including ultranationalism, white supremacy, support of authoritarianism, and a hatred of minority groups. Now, while the revelations were certainly shocking, given the divisive political discourse over Gamergate, the fact that Destructive Creations were at best neo-Nazi adjacent, and at worst outright dangerous ultra-nationalists, likely did depressingly little to change people's minds. For those critical of Hatred's content, the revelation gave another reason to not support these guys, especially as more pieces detailing the kinds of groups Hatred's makers supported came to light. For example, the same day Fuck No Video Games put out their article, the blog Player Attack published a companion piece titled, "Hatred is the neo-Nazi hate crime of video games," declaring, quote, "Hatred is a thinly veiled piece of self-defined propaganda promoting and glorifying white supremacy and violent racism," end quote. On the other hand, the extracurricular activities of Yaroslav Zielinski and his team also did little to move the needle among Hatred supporters. Many Hatred fans dismissed the accusations outright, since Fuck No Video Games was an avowedly anti-Gamergate blog, which allowed Gamergate supporters to write it all off as SJW propaganda perpetuated by the mainstream gaming press to suppress hatred at all costs. For example, perusing the comments on the Player Attack article, a bunch of Hatred supporters declared the post was, quote, "tabloid sensationalism," end quote, and, quote, "blindly hateful clickbait," end quote. In a pro-Hatred post for the industry website Gama Sutra, indie game developer Tommy Ayala called the neo-Nazi accusations a witch hunt, adding he felt it was nonsense to judge someone based on what they liked on Facebook, writing, quote, "So we base these accusations on Facebook likes, Ed? Is this really the road we want to walk? Start scrutinizing developers' Facebook pages and jumping to conclusions instead of, I don't know, interview them and really asking who they are," end quote. He punctuated this by citing Destructive Creations' official response as evidence the accusations were false. Because, if you supported people who violently harassed Muslims and called being gay, you tell us, right?
Yeah, can't you ask me in a medium where I can get prepared for each question in advance with something that neither confirms nor denies the thing that you were asking about?
Yeah, and leaves me plenty of room to answer questions with just enigmatic smiley face emoticons.
In the interview, he just holds up like a card with the emoji on it, the shrug emoji.
It should also come as no surprise that some in the Gamergate crowd took no issue with Destructive Creations' beliefs because they also ascribed to them and basically responded to the effect of, "So what's so wrong with hating Muslims and gays?" For example, one commenter on the Player Attack post declared, quote, "Since when is being a right-wing activist an insult? This article is so bigoted it's insane. If you want to talk about hate, let's talk about you, yelling at people who don't support homosexuality and accusing them of hating people who are gay," end quote. Because you see, the people criticizing people who say racist and homophobic stuff are the real racists and homophobes. Checkmate, liberals.
Well, he's got me there. Oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, by talking about my racism, why you gotta make everything about race all the time?
You're discriminating against my beliefs that it's okay to discriminate people. I'm the real victim here, not those people I threw slurs at or whatever.
So, Kevin, I want to make sure that I'm still following along with the broad themes. So we're looking into the background of the people that this game company follows or has publicly said that they're into, or you can at least tell by their Twitter feeds, right?
Yeah, so pretty much people looked into their social media and the things that they publicly say that they like online. These are the people who made Hatred, who were out there supporting these kinds of neo-Nazi and fascist and ultra-nationalist groups. People are supporting a game that was made by neo-Nazis, basically, is what the argument is in the criticism of it. And they're not making a lot of denials of that, I would argue.
Right, which is like a Trumpian strategy.
And it's also going to another Trumpian strategy. They're falling back into their base, basically like, this is left-wing propaganda, these are lies. For example, that group Never Again I mentioned a little while ago, the ones that, just because they're Polish doesn't mean they can't be Nazis. Zelensky commented and said he thought that was a far-left propaganda site. And so they're very much trying to frame this narrative as like, this is the lying mainstream media trying to put us down. And part of that bigger argument they're making about like that our game is a big statement against the SJWs and all this stuff. They've riled the base up to the point that that base will not question or challenge or push back on this other thing because assume it's another lie.
Seems like a lot of work to promote a game that probably did not make a ton of money.
But going back to these conversations, another common response among Hatred supporters was to parrot destructive creations and focus specifically on the Nazi accusation, saying that there's no way any Pole in their right mind would support the people who invaded, occupied, and murdered millions of their fellow citizens during World War II. For example, in a petition created following Valve's decision to remove Hatred from Steam Greenlight, and for more on that, check out our previous episode, one signer commented, quote, claiming the developers are neo-Nazis is just plain stupid and offensive. That's in all caps. Since the German Nazis committed hate, torture, and genocide on the Polish people during their occupation of West Poland, the Russians occupied East Poland and did the same things as the Nazis did, but less extreme. Why would the Polish, if any, support Nazism when the Germans committed these atrocities to them? End quote. But you can kind of see a logic to that.
I mean, you can, but the bigger point is not so much that they're Nazis specifically, but that they're fascists. So what would you say to the accusation that you're fascist?
Exactly. Because I think this is just a really, really convenient sidestep by Hatred supporters to dodge the question about what they believe in, to talk about whether or not they're actually Nazis. They're reframing the conversation to something that is easy for them to defend. And it kind of gets away from the bigger issue, which I think is a bigger point that Fuck No Video Games, the post is trying to make, which is the guys who made Hatred, even if they're not straight up Nazis, definitely seem to be really on board with people who oppress or hate marginalized groups like Muslims, Jews, immigrants, and LGBTQIA people. That's the big point. And I think they're using the Nazi thing as a way of not talking about that. They're reframing the argument to something that's a little bit more palatable, that puts people more on the defensive, because they have to concede, well, yeah, they're not card-carrying Nazis. Some also argued that a game's creators' politics are irrelevant relative to their games, effectively saying that Hatred should only be judged on whether it's a good game, regardless of what beliefs destructive creations employees may or may not hold. This line of reasoning follows basically what we've covered about Gamergate philosophy, in that one of its key arguments is that games should be assessed purely on their technical merits and entertainment value. And anything beyond that, for example, addressing a game's representations of race or gender, or its possible greater social, cultural, or political meanings, are just SJWs inserting their own politics into games to force their beliefs on gamers. As one commenter posted, quote, I fail to see what somebody's political stance has to do with anything here. I detest liberals. You don't see me going out of my way to lambast games made by such people, end quote. Commenting on a Steam thread regarding the neo-Nazi accusations, one person declared in a May 30th, 2015 post, quote, who gives a shit anyway? There aren't any Nazi propaganda materials in the game. It's not important what the devs do in their spare time, end quote. I should point out that they have no way of knowing that there's Nazi stuff in there, having posted this the day before the game came out.
I mean, it's weird the way that person, like, very incompetently touches on the whole issue of separating the art from the artist, just because, like, that's something that, like, a lot of people debate. Like, I know some people who love Harry Potter, but it seems like the author of Harry Potter is an unrepentant transphobe, or like, I like some of Woody Allen's movies, but now I don't feel comfortable doing that or something. And so it is funny the way that this person so blithely ignores the ramifications of giving money to someone who will perhaps use that money to do immoral things,
Yeah, can I yes and there? Just because you don't understand what fascism is and how it works and don't realize that you're a fascist. Just because you don't realize you're a fascist doesn't mean you're not, right? Like, what are some of the ideologies? Like rejecting the idea that violence is inherently bad and that there's a natural social order and autocracy and forcible suppression. You know, it's a game where you're just running around murdering people that you don't like. And it's not like the hatred guys running around murdering other hatred dudes. Oh, hey, you seem like a really dangerous dude. No, you seem like a dangerous dude. I'm going to have to put you down, dude. Maybe I'll put you down first. It's for the good of the nation. No, it's for the good of my nation. Like,
The soil is thirsty for your blood or my blood. Somebody's blood.
it's the same blood. It's probably the same type anyway. Okay, you be one dude and I'll be the other dude. I showed up for the showdown.
Between episodes, Kevin, can we just do like a spin-off podcast on the feed that's just like Alan and his neighbor across the street who he hates, Adam or something, and like,
Hey, keep your guns off my lawn. I told you 1,000 times to not let your dog poop on my lawn. I put that fescue down last week. This is a real problem.
You know which bin the recycling goes in, right? I mean, how many times do we have to be over this? It's the blue bin, dude. Are you colorblind or something? Because if you are, I mean, I'm very sorry about that. I'm not making an accusation. I'd just like to establish that.
hey, we'll talk off mic about developing this.
Workshop this, yeah. All right. It's funny you mentioned that. That actually segues well to my next part, which is there is a philosophy in literary criticism called the death of the author. And basically the idea of the death of the author is basically we should judge a piece of media solely on its own merits, and that you shouldn't factor in external factors like the creator's politics. And it is very much a conversation that's come up a lot with the J.K. Rowling stuff, that she is avowedly transphobic, and should we judge Harry Potter relative to Rowling is the question.
Okay, but like to that point, if we're going to judge the game Hatred under its own merits, can you make a convincing argument that this is espousing a fascist ideology?
I think that's a fair point. I really do. It's a might makes right, and everything should be dealt with violently. Yeah, I think you can make that argument.
Yeah, it's a white dude running around with a shotgun or whatever weapon and is running around killing women and minorities and people who are trying to safeguard other people's safety.
Yeah, and also, even ignoring all of that, so many of the people who are defending Hatred are defending it because of the political views that the game espouses and the way it is advertised. You know, totally contradicting this whole idea of, hey, let's just judge the game on its own. Because really, it seems like you're judging the game based on an ad campaign that says, this is the game the SJWs don't want you to play.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point. Look, we covered last time. Their whole bag was, we are setting this up as a statement against the SJWs and art house games. And like, no one would have cared about this game if the message wasn't there, if they didn't engender this message with it. There are even people who said, this looks like bland and generic and it's going to be dull, but I'm going to support it anyway because I need to say that this is my statement against censorship in the SJW. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Like the politics are what drove this game into any relevancy at all, is the politics.
Yeah, and why this game? Why is this your hill to die on, right? It's because it's a fascist game under its own merits.
And yeah, speaking for myself, again, the whole death of the author question, I've been trained as a historian, and one thing that's been ingrained in me is that context is really important. You cannot completely disassociate anything that has been created from the world in which it was created. Every piece of media is filtered through somebody's head or a group of people's head, and the way they're thinking about the world is reflected in their medium. So I think you can never completely detach that. And it's also, on the other hand, is like, aside from the J.K. Rowling, there are people like that in the gaming community. Like, for example, Scott Cawthon. Scott Cawthon was the guy who made Five Nights at Freddy's. It came out not too long ago that Scott Cawthon was taking a lot of those Five Nights at Freddy's monies and putting a lot of money into Republicans. He donated a ton of money to Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. And people took him to task on that. It's like, well, this is, where I put my money in my politics should have nothing to do with the game. And to take it in a different direction is Doug TenNapel. And Doug TenNapel was the guy who made Earthworm Jim. And Doug TenNapel is an avowed transphobe. He says a lot of homophobic and transphobic stuff. As a historian, I can say that I need to bring in that context. As a gamer, as a geek, as someone who grew up liking Earthworm Jim, who loved the cartoon in the early 90s when they were a kid, it just makes me really fucking sad that a person who could create something that I liked so much also believes that large swaths of people should either not have rights or not exist. And speaking totally for myself, I'm going to adjust my playing and consuming habits accordingly. That's my thought on all this.
This may seem completely unrelated, but I think you'll see the the common theme here. You know how when the movie The Matrix first came out, everybody thought this was obviously a story about technology overarching and how we might be living in a simulation. But if you look at it through the lens of the Wachowskis, you can easily see that this is an allegory for gender transformation. I'm sure there are a bunch of people who stopped liking the movie when they realized that, or maybe they never realized it.
All of this being said, for all of Hatred supporters' accusations that the mainstream gaming press was trying to suppress it in service of their Dark Lord political correctness, more than a few journalists who interviewed Destructive Creations leading up to Hatred's release did them a real solid when it came to not pressing them too hard on their alleged support for neo-Nazis. Some such as Polygon continued to press them or mention the game's far-right ties. However, others didn't even mention the accusations or even outright dismiss them. For example, in an interview with Zelensky published on Gama Sutra a week before Hatred's release, Albert Palka dismissively mentioned the accusations in passing on his way to an overall positive conversation with Zelensky, writing, quote, "The team behind Hatred was accused of being neo-Nazis, anti-Islamic, anti-immigration, pretty much anti-everything and everyone, because why would press cover a game itself when there are so many interesting topics to discuss, right?" End quote.
I mean, given how much we last episode talked about how the media just kept shining light on this company, that's such a disingenuous claim that like, oh, why is the media talking about all these other things except the game? Like, when every 5 minutes they're going to Destructive Creations to get a soundbite.
Yeah, I can't help but thinking that there was an opportunity where a lot of the gaming press could have just deplatformed these guys. There was no reason they needed to keep paying attention to these guys. The gaming scene was so big and it was only getting bigger. Like, they could have talked about 100 different games and this is the one they kept going back to. There was no reason they had to keep talking to them and signal boosting them. They did not need the kind of attention they got. Again, that's neither here nor there at this point. But so what we're going to do for the rest of the episode is we're going to move away from Hatred and we're going to talk about the games that they've made since then. Before we do that, get over here. Let's do another one.
Nice.
Okay, I'll try to pick a good one here. Here we go.
Life, dreams, hope. Where do they come from? And where do they go? Such meaningless things. I'll destroy them all.
Okay, there's no way. There's no way he gets that many words out at once. I'm saying no.
I agree. That's not from Hatred.
I might have tipped my hand too much on that one. You are correct. That is from the final boss fight of what my opinion is the greatest Final Fantasy game, my favorite at least, Final Fantasy VI, that is uttered by the final boss, Kefka. Let's fast forward to April the 19th, 2016, the day Destructive Creations published their second title. As with Hatred, they looked to pay homage to another neglected PC gaming genre. With Hatred, it had been the twin-stick shooter. With their new game, it was an arcade shooter. Citing inspiration from the likes of 1980s computer shooting games such as Operation Wolf and Beachhead, Destructive Creations' new game involved a stationary gunner who fights off advancing waves of enemies, earning power-ups and racking up points along the way. Now, you may recall from our deep dive into Hatred, the Destructive Creations designed it as a stripped-down, purely action-oriented title with no larger meaning. As Zelensky explained in an interview with Colin Campbell of Polygon, quote, "We wanted to create something contrary to prevailing standards of forcing games to be more polite or nice than they really are or even should be. Yes, putting things simply, we are developing a game about killing people, but what's more important is the fact that we are honest in our approach. Our game doesn't pretend to be anything else than what it is, and we don't add to it any fake philosophy." End quote. With that in mind, the team's sophomore title veered more into the overtly political category. Now, if you're gonna make a shooting game, you need something to shoot at. And rather than the standard gaming fare of aliens, monsters, or even Nazis, Yaroslav and his team decided their game's cannon fodder would be the troops of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, aka ISIS, in the creatively named IS Defense.
Oh boy, man, they're really trying to thread this needle here because on the one hand, you know, we can all agree, I think, that the tactics employed by the Islamic State are reprehensible, but it also sounds like a game where the point is just to gun down a lot of brown people.
We're going to talk about that. I will give you at least a brief look at what this game looks like.
Supplies fully loaded.
All right, so for the listeners, you're playing a stationary person at like a gun station, shooting people who are far away. blowing up submarines, which I'm not aware of ISIS having access to.
Yeah. So what this is it's a proxy for the D-Day invasion, where you're the Nazis entrenched on the beach, and the boats of troops who are trying to make it on shore are the Islamic State.
Yeah, pretty much. Hold on to the Normandy connection. We're going to talk about that in a second. So yeah, IS Defense offers a Red Dawn style scenario set in the not too distant future of 2020, where the Islamic State has successfully conquered northern Africa and are setting their sights on Europe. The player assumes the role of a lone NATO gunner fighting off waves of ISIS soldiers in Sicily, Spain, Croatia, and southern France. And I will tell you, that couple of minutes that we saw of it, that's the whole game. It's just shooting at people as they come at you, is the whole game.
So a kind of monotonous, repetitive game made by the same people who made Hatred.
Now, I heard your reaction when we said it was going to be ISIS, and I'm not going to get into, I think what ISIS does is, reprehensible. They're bad. They're objectively bad. I think we're all on the same page on that. However, I will say that depicting real-world geopolitical organizations in a video game is a dicey proposition, and many game companies tend to avoid it. On the one hand, most developers don't want to be accused of minimizing or trivializing the suffering of real people victimized by groups like ISIS. On top of that, when it comes to multiplayer-heavy games such as military shooters, chances are some players will have to be the faction opposite of, for example, Special Forces, and you can already see the pearl-clutching headlines about how this or that game lets you play as ISIS. For example, the 2010 military shooter Medal of Honor was initially going to allow players to play as the Taliban in multiplayer. However, following a media backlash, EA DICE removed mentions of the Taliban from the game, replacing them with the more generic term opposing force.
Yeah, they workshopped it. It was originally going to be Schmalaban, and then they were like, well, hold on, let's take another pass at that.
Wasn't that the band that Prince was in? Oh, wait, no, that was Charlemagn, right?
I'm aware of the Revolution, but mostly because of the Chappelle Show joke.
Kevin, can I offer a thought on the last point that we were talking about?
Sure.
So with ISIS as like the opposing force or the bad guys in this game. So let me talk to the two of you about online dating. Now, I'm sure you've used dating apps in the past and in the way back. And people put things on their dating profile that at face value seems like a normal thing to put. But then you might want to take a look at the lens of why is this the first thing they mentioned about themselves, right? So let's say they talk about a trip to Disney World. And yes, lots of people have been to Disney World. But if they mention Disney like first and the second and the third point and their entire profile is about Disney, you may realize, oh my God, this is one of those people whose entire life is about, Disney products, in which case that may or may not be your bag. I would like to draw an allusion from that to this. Yes, ISIS is bad, but why make ISIS the bad guy in this video game? Why make that choice? Like, yeah, I think ISIS is bad, but I wouldn't make a whole video game about ISIS because I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about ISIS.
No, I agree with you, Phil. And I was thinking about this after we had recorded the last episode about Hatred, that you could make a game with the exact same type of gameplay, except it's about, I'm a space marine and I've landed on an alien planet. And so I'm just shooting various alien monsters. But you choose to put those same, twin stick mechanics into a game where you're just going through a neighborhood, killing unarmed civilians. That makes a statement about, who you are and where your interests lie. And so if you make a game about just getting to shoot a bunch of ISIS people over and over again, after you have said, wait, why is everybody getting all upset that I liked a Facebook group about harassing Muslims? Yeah, I think, is it Maya Angelou has a quote that, when somebody tells you who they are, you should listen.
You should believe them, yeah.
Believe them, yeah. Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a sec, too. One of the things people talked about with Hatred is like the context of the violence is really important. Violence is in a lot of games. I think we're all fans of violent video games, but using the twin stick shooter example, I love Robotron 64. It's a fun time. You're out there shooting robots and you're rescuing humans, and like you could say mechanically it's the exact same thing as Hatred, but I think that the context makes it more palatable for me. Like I'm not seeking out games where I'm going up to, unarmed crowds in a mall or whatever and just massacring them. I like the idea of saving the world and and saving humanity versus, curb stomping a person so I can get health back,
Oh, and one small disclaimer. Apologies to any listeners if you're one of those Disney people. I don't really hate Disney as a thing, and if that's your life choice, that's totally fine. I was just using that as an example.
I have no opinion on Disney adults. But going back...
In fact, yeah, any woman who is a Disney person, contact me separately. I'll give you Phil's details. I'll let that meeting happen.
Oh, God.
Okay, going back to the whole dicey idea of depicting real-life geopolitical groups. Even when AAA games depict wars set in the present day or the near future between real countries, they often go out of their way to avoid implicating real people or groups. So, for example, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and 3, the central narrative of the game is a war between the US and Russia. However, the game makes it clear that fictional terrorists and rogue military groups have manipulated these countries into war. Rather than, say, for example, put in the vein and say Vladimir Putin, it makes sure to fictionalize this. It's not making you implicate a specific group of people that aren't like, bad guys the game made. Alternatively, games involving real geopolitical groups are often set within a historical backdrop. For example, World War II, because who doesn't enjoy sticking it to Nazis? And there are exceptions to this. One that immediately comes to mind is the Homefront series, which has the United States invaded and occupied by North Korea. And the second one, Homefront the Revolution, goes so far as to invent its own slur for the soldiers of the Democratic People's Republic. In that vein, another issue with depicting real-world geopolitical groups in games is something you've all mentioned already, Andy. You very aptly put this, is like, it can put developers in a troublesome position where they can be implicitly or explicitly glorifying the killing of specific religious or ethnic groups. Going back to ISIS, it's a short walk from let's kill this specific group connected to a small faction of Islam to let's kill all Muslims. Interestingly, the first enemies you encounter in IS defense are not ululating terrorists or G.I. Joe-esque gunships and tanks. Instead, you start off by shooting unarmed rafts of people as they make their way to shore. This led some observers to wonder if Destructive Creations was trying to make a statement about the millions of migrants and refugees fleeing the likes of ISIS to Europe. It's also worth mentioning that this ongoing crisis has helped fuel anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim groups in Europe and the United States who wave the flag of radical extremists bringing violence and taking our jobs and everything else you expect from these people. Going back to what we've already covered, anti-Muslim sentiments are a big part of right-wing politics in Poland, and we all know that Zelensky and his team are pretty on board with that. As Emanuel Mayberg observed in an April 18th, 2016 article on IS defense for Vice, quote, IS defense isn't saying it in black and white, but what it's not very subtly saying in between the lines is that foreigners of this particular variety are bad and should be treated with extreme prejudice. IS defense, like Donald Trump in the United States and nationalist parties across Europe, is blaming refugees for the crimes committed by the people they're trying to escape, end quote. However, Zelensky made it clear that he was not going to take the SJW bait and admit he made a migrant killing game. When asked if IS defense was implicitly advocating for the killing of refugees fleeing the likes of ISIS, Zelensky felt the need to set the record straight, explaining to Mayberg that he felt many refugees were, at best, never going to assimilate to European ways and be a drain on social programs, and at worst, were actually terrorists working for ISIS in a nefarious plot to invade Europe, saying, quote, ISIS said a few years ago they will smuggle their members among so-called refugees, and they actually do. We all know that, I suppose. That's the first thing. Second is that, sorry, but I don't believe in the positive intentions of most of these refugees. Most of them are coming to Europe to live as lazy-ass social funding suckers, not for honest work, not to bring anything positive here. Of course, there are some good people among them who are simply seeking a better life, and I don't have anything against them, but it's a small minority among these masses. Third thing is that these Muslim immigrants are not adapting to European culture and customs, and they don't intend to and don't even try to convince me it's different. I believe most of Europeans know that nothing good is coming from taking a shitload of these immigrants, so there's nothing to demonize. They've demonized themselves, end quote.
Wait, so when asked, hey, have you just made a migrant shooting simulator? He's like, no, I haven't made a migrant shooting simulator, but let me tell you all the reasons I hate these fucking migrants.
That was the same thing that occurred to me, too. It was just like, oh, you wanted to use this as an opportunity to espouse a bunch of views that are totally not related to this game.
And perusing the game's Steam reviews, more than a few IS defense players were definitely picking up what Yaroslav was putting down. In addition to many comments on how much fun it was to kill ISIS, several users commented they felt the game offered a, for lack of a better term, final solution to the refugee crisis.
Oh my God.
As one reviewer explained, quote, the best European migrant crisis simulator currently on the market, 10 out of 10, end quote. Another added, quote, the wet dream of every true European, end quote. Still another comment in the review, quote, you kill refugees and terrorists. What's not to like, end quote. To this, several commenters agreed. Moreover, a game where you could deal with refugees with lethal force also attracted the attention of the larger right-wing media sphere because, of course, it did. For example, Breitbart covered IS defense in an article basically lifted whole cloth from Emanuel Mayberg's Vice article, albeit with a much more positive spin on the prospect of killing digital Muslims. Perusing the comments section, the game's premise had even the non-gamers in the far-right shithead crowd giddy with excitement, posting things like, quote, the theme for this game is long overdue. Good job, end quote. End quote. Sounds fun. Hopefully you get to blow up boatloads of refugees. That'd be awesome, end quote. The commenters also rapidly devolved into a spirited debate over which was worse, the Muslims or the Jews, which I imagine has to be a pretty common occurrence at Breitbart.
Wow.
Your last comment just made me think, oh gosh. And I'm sure these games do exist, and maybe they're not very easy to find, but there probably are games where you get to play as a Nazi killing Jews. And if one of them tried to release one of those games prominently, would some of these people have any pause, endorsing it? And clearly the people who are getting into a lively debate over what's worse, Muslims or Jews, they would be on board. I just wonder, are there some people who just lack the self-awareness to realize, well, wait, if I agree Nazis are bad for killing Jews, am I bad if I want to kill Muslims? But I don't know.
Yeah, it's... get over here.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, here we go. Get my voice. This is a long one, too.
I never thought it would be so easy to slaughter my whole neighborhood. I can feel their pain, their suffering flowing through my veins. It's like the most intense drug, and I need more, much more.
That's got to be from a Kirby game, right? I don't know. It seems a little long-winded for Alan, but I'm going to guess it's from hatred.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction. If it's not from Animal Crossing, this is probably hatred.
This is, in fact, from hatred. I'm mostly doing that get over here because it made me read Breitbart, which was not fun. Now, I'm not going to address IS Defense's merits as a game. Watching Let's Play videos, it looks like an incredibly generic, dull arcade shooter. It has over 1,200 reviews on Steam, most of them positive, and many I read expressing the same sentiments of how much fun it is to kill Muslims, white supremacist slogans, and occasional straight-up Nazi shit, to which I say parenthetically, Valve, sort out the Nazis on your platform. You mentioned before about how this looks like the storming of Normandy, defending it, Phil. One user posted he liked the idea behind the game, but he hoped that there were more options for different historical scenarios, saying, quote, what I wish was if there were different enemies that you could fight and even play as, such as defending the beaches of Normandy as a German MiG-2042 gunner sitting in a concrete bunker, or fighting off invading Russians similar to many of the Call of Duty campaigns, end quote. Who were the defenders during Normandy? So the last thing I'll say about this game is that I find it a fascinating contrast to Hatred, because in that game, Destructive Creations attempted to make a stripped-down, violent game with no context, although we've argued whether or not they actually did that quite a bit today. IS Defense is the opposite. It's nothing without its context. Take out the opening cutscene of ISIS advancing across northern Africa and into Europe, and the enemies can be space dragoons from the planet Uranus for all it matters in the game. I should also mention that IS Defense is around when the gaming press finally got the hint and stopped giving these guys so much of a free platform.
Hear, hear.
Good job.
However, it did not mean Destructive Creations stopped making games. And on May the 22nd, 2018, Destructive Creations put out a squad-based, real-time strategy game called Ancestors Legacy. Set in medieval Europe, Ancestors Legacy allows the player to control one of four factions: the Vikings, the Germans, the Slavs, and the English, and create and manage units of infantry, archers, and mounted troops, and battle either human opponents or go through a single-player campaign. Leading up to its release, Destructive Creations representatives painted Ancestors Legacy as the company finally growing up and putting their attention-seeking past behind them. As producer and designer Tomek Gop explained to Harry Shepard of PC Games and, quote, controversy can only get you so far. People know what Destructive Creations is. People have heard about Hatred, but you're not going to ride that pony until the very end, and we're not doing that, end quote. You know how it is. We were all young once. Who hasn't incited a culture war to sell a video game and had to answer for you and your coworkers' close ties to neo-Nazis? just a part of growing up. Incidentally, Shepard's fawning interview with Gobb makes no mention of this aspect of the hatred controversy, to say nothing of everything we've already covered with IS defense.
I also wonder, is that just like cynicism on their part of like, the Gamergate just doesn't have nearly as much juice as it did before. And so we're just not going to get nearly as much mileage by trying to boost that anyway.
Yeah, who knows? Ancestors Legacy is also the company's first cross-platform game. It's available for download on PC, PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. In terms of its Metacritic score, it's also the company's most highly rated game to date. As of this recording, it has a respectable 77 Metascore with a 7.3 out of 10 among users. Again, like IS Defense, I'm not going to devote a lot of attention to Ancestors Legacy as a game. It seems on paper to be a pretty straightforward medieval RTS like Age of Empires or Stronghold Crusader. However, I will point out that medieval and Crusader iconography is really popular in far-right groups, because a bunch of these dudes are massive fucking nerds who like to cosplay in armor and furs like a deplorable Renaissance fair. They love dressing up and waving flags of medieval and Crusader stuff. For example, white supremacists waved flags with Crusader crosses at the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, and shouted medievalist slogans like Deus Vult, which is Latin for God wills it, which is really popular among anti-Muslim groups. I also saw Deus Vult in a couple of IS Defense reviews. When Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building on January 6, 2021, among the more colorful characters at this violent insurrection trying to overthrow an election was a guy in furs that people dubbed the QAnon shaman, although I prefer another name I heard from online, Dances with Karens.
You know what they should do? They should mod IS Defense so that you're playing as a Capitol building security guard trying to defend the Capitol against the QAnon people.
Boss fight against the Q shaman. He also wore a bunch of medieval-themed runes, which are also popular among neo-Nazis who often use it as substitutes for swastikas. And scholars of white supremacy know that these kinds of symbols paint a message of an imagined past of European racial purity and Christian dominance. These ideas are also popular in Polish right-wing groups. According to a Brookings report on right-wing Islamophobia in Poland, one of the tenets of Polish conservative groups is the idea of the country as a bulwark for Catholicism, a term they called antimorale Christianitas, framing their Islamophobia as part of a long battle against Muslim invasion dating back to the Battle of Vienna in 1683, in which a joint Polish-Austrian army defeated the Turks. And the Battle of Vienna is sort of a foundational thing in a lot of right-wing circles in Poland. It's kind of like an important date for them. And you even see this in Destructive Creations games. The achievement for completing IS Defense is Crusade Complete, with an image of a Templar helmet. And there's an achievement for killing 30,000 terrorists called Jan III Sobieski, which is a reference to the Polish king who led the Battle of Vienna.
Jeez. What a distasteful blending of racism and insufferable nerdiness. And I say this as a nerd who's insufferable, but not in a racist way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
not racist and stuff.
Exactly. Just in a pedantic, like, well, here's what the transporters in Star Trek should really sound like.
Is that an impression of yourself?
I was trying to sound like a dork. Why did I just sound like my regular voice?
It's all just a fucking circle jerk with these people, you know? It's just like all going back on itself, and it's like, God. On October the 17th, 2021, a pair of German anti-fascist organizations published a dossier on Destructive Creations' ultra-nationalist and neo-fascist ties, going through the ways the company blended their far-right ideology into their games, because they've been doing this long enough that anti-fascist groups have dossiers on them. On Ancestors Legacy, they noted that it wasn't as overt as IS Defense. However, they noted how its use of medieval imagery allowed the company to send subtle messages to others who also held their beliefs, writing, quote, Ancestors Legacy is a classic wolf in sheep's clothing, a seemingly innocuous game that uses a pseudo-medieval setting to seemingly redeem its studio after the scandals caused by IS Defense and hatred. Destructive Creations is thus pursuing a strategy with Ancestors Legacy that historian Paul Studevant calls Schrodinger's medievalism. They're using narratives and symbols that, taken on their own, can appear and be interpreted accordingly even without radical right-wing intent, which is why the game is considered harmless. But at the same time, the density of these narratives and symbols creates an image of the Middle Ages that deliberately distorts the complexity of the era, and this opens up a surface for the projection of the right-wing ideas of a white cis male Europe, its crusades, and a type of masculinity linked to violence and brutality. End quote. Ancestors Legacy attracted positive reviews on Steam, although from what I can tell, the reviews primarily focus on gameplay rather than any specific overt political message the game's trying to convey. That's also largely the case in the game's Steam message boards. However, I did find one revealing exception, and it happens to be one of the most active posts on the board right now. On November the 13th, 2020, one user started a thread titled "Evil Germans, Heroic Polish?" and lamented the depiction of the German Teutonic Order as the bad guys in the game's single-player campaign. The ensuing debate this comment triggered has, as of this recording, been going on for over 2 years, with posts as recent as November the 26th, 2022, and a fascinating look at some of Ancestors Legacy's player base. Most of the debate in the thread boils down to various ultra-nationalist dudes of varying nationalities touting their country's supremacy over everyone else's and lamenting the intrusion of various minority groups as the source of their country's ills. This has included one person who opened their contribution to this veritable marketplace of ideas with the following, quote, "Modern Germany has nothing to do with former Germany, with real Germany. It's an occupied land since 1945 with millions of people, which meanwhile don't care if they are Germans or world citizens. Dead culture," end quote. Once again, Valve, sort out the Nazis on your platform.
Whenever we have a good moment, I would like to get over here.
I would also like to get over here.
Yeah, let's do one. We're overdue one. Okay, here we go.
You have no chance to survive. Make your time.
I'm gonna guess no, that's not from Hatred.
There's something about make your time that reminds me of like all your base are belong to us. So I'm also going to say no.
You are correct. That is a reference to All Your Base, All Belong to Us.
Yeah!
The character Cats from Zero Wing. That's the line immediately following All Your Base or Belong to Us. It goes, "You have no chance to survive. Make your time."
Make your time. That's right. God damn.
Well
Damn.
done.
Way to go, Phil. I think I know who set us up the bomb. I think Phil set us up the
Somebody
bomb.
set up the bomb. I can't believe I still remember that. That's like at least 12 years old, right?
Yeah. What a pull. Like one of the earliest examples of something going viral on the internet, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of World War II, Destructive Creation's fourth, and as of this recording, most recent title, is set during that conflict because it goes without saying that neo-Nazis have some strong opinions on the Second World War. War Mongrels, which was released on Steam on October the 19th, 2021, is a squad-based real-time strategy game that follows a pair of German soldiers stationed on the Eastern Front in 1944 who desert to join a Polish resistance group to fight against both the Nazis and the Soviets. Now, to understand the context of this game, I need to step back for a minute and share some more Polish history. The game is a tribute to a group known as the Cursed Soldiers. The Cursed Soldiers is a collective term for several different anti-Soviet resistance groups that operated in Poland between roughly 1944 and 1956. Since the fall of communism, the Cursed Soldiers have been valorized as national heroes in Poland. In the last few years, monuments to them have gone up across the country, and the Polish government established a National Day of Remembrance to them, with the first taking place on March the 1st, 2011. The guys at Destructive Creations are clearly fans of the Cursed Soldiers. The Fuck No Video Games article noted a group photo of the team on the company's website, where Jakub Stikno is wearing a Cursed Soldiers themed t-shirt. However, the historical reality of the Cursed Soldiers is complicated and controversial. Critics argued that supporters overstate their size and influence. On top of that, they accuse supporters of downplaying or outright ignoring the ways certain Cursed Soldier groups actively collaborated with the Nazis during their occupation of Poland, as well as atrocities committed by members of these groups against marginalized people, including various Jewish and Eastern European immigrant communities. It's also worth mentioning that the Cursed Soldiers have been especially popular in the Polish right, and some right-wing groups in Poland have adopted the memory of the Cursed Soldiers as not just the symbol of Polish resistance against invading armies like the Soviets, but against any groups they feel are infiltrating Poland, such as, for example, Muslims or Jews. Also sprinkled in War Mongrel's narrative is a more mainstream historical myth about World War II called the myth of the Clean Wehrmacht. Anybody heard of this?
No.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I want to, but keep going.
The myth of the Clean Wehrmacht is a false narrative pushed after World War II ended that attempted to absolve the Wehrmacht, now the Wehrmacht is the Nazi German army, of Nazi atrocities committed during World War II, including things like war crimes against civilians and POWs and the army's participation in the Holocaust. It basically says that that wasn't their deal. That was more the SS was doing that kind of stuff. Advocates of this narrative paint the Wehrmacht as basically good and honorable, composed of heroes fighting for the pride of their nation who were manipulated by the propaganda of the Nazi high command. Have you ever heard the whole just following orders argument? That's basically this. Even though there's tons of historical evidence that debunks this claims of a morally clean German army, there's plenty of evidence of them actively participating in those kinds of things and also being well aware of what they were fighting for. Anti-Semitism was also quite rife in the German army. They knew what they were fighting for. The narrator of War Mongrels is a German soldier who asserts he joined the army to fight what he thought was a noble cause, which he describes as fighting Bolshevism. And I will point as an aside, Bolshevism was a rhetoric used in Nazi Germany, but they often precede it with the word Jewish. And he goes in to fight this cause of fighting Bolshevism, only to realize too late that the soldiers around him were murdering prisoners and civilians, thus prompting his defection. And interestingly, the game goes out of its way to make a clear distinction between the good German soldiers who join the Polish resistance and the bad ones who stay in the Wehrmacht and the SS, in the sense that the Wehrmacht and the SS soldiers speak English with very stereotypically German accents. Meanwhile, the two dudes who defect from the German army speak American accents.
And I'm sure the real cursed soldiers did as well.
Examining the game's Steam page, users' reviews were a lot more mixed for War Mongrels compared to Destructive Creations' previous titles. Less because of its questionable take on World War II history, and more because it's apparently very buggy, to the point that Destructive Creations felt compelled to release a new version they dubbed the polished version on September the 21st, 2022. There's an interesting through line, politics aside, and we've talked a lot about the politics. There's a through line that goes through a lot of reviews and conversations about Destructive Creations games. They have kind of two habits aside from all the shit we've covered. One, their games are very expensive. War Mongrels came out, it was $40. Ancestors Legacy was like $45 when it came out. So people complain that it's not worth the price. And they consistently put out buggy games. They just do not have great quality control among these neo-Nazis.
Yeah, I was like, when you're talking about the release years of these games, I was like, well, for a small team, these are relatively short development periods. So either they're really small games or they're not doing a great job.
Maybe it's a counterpoint in favor of running with scissors. Slow and steady.
Yes.
Let's start wrapping up our story. On August the 28th, 2020, leading up to the release of War Mongrels, the folks at Destructive Creations were invited to speak on a panel at the annual DevCom Summit, which is a Germany-based developers conference. The topic of the panel was to be, quote, developers against violence, anti-Semitism, racism, fascism, sexism, and discrimination, end quote.
Can't wait to see how this goes.
However, the conference organizers hastily canceled the panel after several people responded that given their history, Destructive Creations was more on the pro side of the anti-Semitism, racism, and fascism conversation.
Yeah, that was probably a good call.
As for Yaroslav Zielinski, the guy we started this whole sordid tale with, while he's made his Facebook likes hidden, for whatever reason, he keeps his wall posts and comments public. He's been active on the platform at least up until May the 17th, 2022, and most of his content is a steady stream of anti-Semitism, transphobia, and white supremacist shit. That isn't to say his views haven't changed in the years since hatred jumped into the gaming headlines. You'll be happy to know that despite his initial denials back in 2014, he's now comfortable calling himself a Nazi. As he explained in a Facebook comment, quote, I've already gotten used to the fact that according to the latest interpretation of the word, I match the criteria, end quote. And that's where we're going to end it. But before we go into final thoughts, I say, get over here.
Get over here!
All right.
All the flock in the same barn, birds of a feather, die together.
I'm going to guess that this is from Hatred, and I'm going to guess that it's part of the game where you get to shoot up a church.
Animal Crossing?
It's part of one of Mr. Rossetti's rants. Yeah, this is from Hatred. It's what it is. It's what it is in this game at this point. All right, final thoughts.
I guess just like it says on the tin, this is just an episode about why these dudes at Destructive Creations are Nazis and I don't like them. And you delivered. So good job. Even though I learned a lot of specifically new things, somehow it didn't change my opinion of them when all I knew was that they had made the game Hatred.
Thinking about the theme that we have explored here in other episodes, I'm going to make a hypothesis that hate can never be the root of true creativity. If that's what your game starts with, it's going to end with a shitty game.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Well
Because
put.
hate, it can give you a kind of passion, but not a creative passion, only a destructive passion. And that won't take you far. You need to have love to really want to build something good.
So in the spirit of games as something that we can celebrate and enjoy for its beauty and that we can participate in together, to participate in something that is bigger than the sum of its parts, that will never occur with games like this.
I think that's well said. Really well said. I'll say before I get into my final points, I am so relieved to be done with these people. This has
Sounds
been
like brutal research.
This has been hard going through a bunch of this stuff. And my final point is that Destructive Creations games, seeing all of them lined up, they're subtle, or in some cases not so subtle, introductions into their ultra-nationalist ideology. What I think about with that is something we'll cover when we talk about the Gamergate episode. Is like there's a very clear Gamergate to like QAnon, alt-right, like fascism pipeline. Gamergate really, I think, allowed a real kind of insidious introduction to some really, I mean, it was awful on its own, but some really scary shit. It was like, if you come in thinking that the media is biased and they're unethical and they're working hand in glove with the game manufacturers, and that some people are gaming the system to prop up their games to give them better attention, like trading sexual favors or whatever, it's not a far walk to then say, you know what, all of the mainstream media is lying to you and that you should not believe or trust any of it. And then if you believe that, there's like these insidious forces are working behind the scenes to manipulate your view of games and are influencing games in such way. And it's the mainstream media, or maybe it's cabals of people. And maybe if you acknowledge that there are cabals of people influencing gaming, it's then not a far walk to cabals are influencing the world and are manipulating the mainstream media. And you can see the breadcrumbs. And like you infiltrate these gamer circles where these conversations are happening, and like you just nudge people a little bit. And you can see that being played out through Destructive Creations games. So like if you start out with this idea that we need to say that SJWs and the liberals cannot censor our game, and we feel like we speak for the real gamers, and the SJWs are minorities who won't replace us, again, going back to that really deliberate language, people are going to be on board. As we said, their supporters of hatred were on board that idea. People who bought the game knowing it was going to be terrible and did it just to stick it to people and gave it good reviews even though they saw the game was terrible, to stick it to those types of people. You've got that kind of base. And you go into your second game and you say, well, it's not just that the liberal games media is never going to cover our game or whatever, but now we're here to tell you the real truth. And throughout the remainders of their games, IS Defense, Ancestors Legacy, and Warmongers, you're crafting a specific narrative of the world. A world where we need to fight back against the infiltrators of our communities, our racial purity, whatever, by any means necessary. We need to fight against the hordes in Ancestors Legacy and go back to a time when we fought and we stood for something. And then things like Warmongers, where we are fighting against invaders. And just like the cursed soldiers were fighting against invaders, we're fighting against invaders now. And again, you can see the thread. And you might have people who pick up one of those later games like IS Defense saying, these guys are too much. There's a Venture Brothers joke goes, wait, you guys are Nazis. And you might realize that and you might jump off. But that doesn't mean that people won't stick around. And those people who stick around will then go to their other games and more people might jump off. But by the end, you're getting people who are true believers. I've heard this in conversations about cults, how like as cults get more extreme, you'll have people who leave and then the people who remain are like the people who are, this is all they are. They live, they breathe, they eat, they sleep, this kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the really insidious, scary things about a company like Destructive Creations, a movement like Gamergate, and where they lead people. Because it starts with ethics in games journalism, and then it can lead to people, dressing up in furs and runes and trying to take over the Capitol building. And with that, let's do it one last time just to cheer us all up. Anybody want to say?
Get over here. And pick the one that's going to be the most difficult of the ones that you've got left, Kevin. Yeah, put me and Andy through our paces.
Most difficult. Okay.
Let's go.
I actually had It's a Me Mario as one of them. Okay, I'll go with this one.
It's time to shoot some canned meat. Ha 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 ha!
What the fuck?
Yeah, I'm gonna guess no. I feel like that's maybe like a Duke Nukem line or something.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Canned meat is probably something that's prominent in some sort of food shortage situation game, so I'm going to say no.
This is totally in hatred.
Oh, are the cops in their squad cars canned meat or
I
something?
think, yeah, cops are coming. And
Oh, for God's sakes. Oh, my.
um,
Okay, what about this? My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard because my milkshake is better than yours.
Oh, that reminds me of another quote from Alan that I love, which is, "Ooh, that thong, fa 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 fa."
All right. And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam's Seek Me by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive. Used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or an idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Andy Hunter.
I'm Phil Thomas, and remember, hate can never be the root of true creativity.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.